Number 1. The island that shouldn't exist. 2,300 kilometers of open Pacific separate Easter Island from the nearest inhabited land, a tiny speck called Pitcairn with about 50 people on it. Chile, the country that actually governs this place, sits 3,700 kilometers away. If you drew a circle around Rapa Nui, as the locals call it, you'd capture nothing but water for thousands of kilometers in every direction. This is, by most definitions, the most remote inhabited place on planet Earth. And yet, roughly 7,700 people call it home. They wake up, make coffee, send their kids to school, complain about the price of milk, and go about ordinary lives on a triangular volcanic rock in the middle of nowhere. Today, we're breaking down exactly how that works, what it costs, what it feels like, and why living here is nothing like what you'd expect from a place famous for giant stone heads. Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now where you live. I want to see how far this video traveled. Drop it in the comments. And if you've ever wondered what it's actually like to live somewhere this cut off from the rest of humanity, stick around, because number 7 on this list is going to change how you think about isolation completely. Number 2, the grocery store that flies in on a Boeing. There is exactly one way for most goods to reach Easter Island: a commercial flight from Santiago, Chile, that lands 5 times a week, sometimes fewer, depending on the season. Everything you see on a supermarket shelf in Hanga Roa, the island's only town, arrived either by that plane or by a cargo ship that comes roughly once a month. This changes the entire economics of daily life. A carton of milk that costs you $1.50 back home can run $4 or $5 here. A kilogram of tomatoes, something a Chilean mainlander pays maybe $1 for, might cost $3 or $4 on the island. Locals have adapted by building an entire subculture around what actually grows here versus what has to be imported. Bananas, sweet potatoes, taro, and a local variety of yam grow easily in the volcanic soil. Meat, dairy, packaged goods, and anything processed comes with an invisible airfare tax baked into the price. Fishermen supplement this. Tuna, especially a local delicacy called kana kana, shows up fresh at family tables because the ocean, ironically, is the one resource that costs nothing to bring home. A household here might spend $600 to $900 a month on food for a family of 4. Noticeably higher than mainland Chile, but the trade-off is a diet that's fresher and more centered on fish and local produce than almost anywhere else in the country. Some families have started experimenting with small home gardens tucked behind their houses, growing chili peppers, herbs, and squash in raised beds built from volcanic rock. It's not enough to replace the supermarket entirely, but it shaves real money off the monthly budget, and for many households, it's become something closer to a hobby passed down between generations than a strict necessity. Neighbors often trade surplus produce over backyard fences, a quiet, informal economy that runs entirely on trust and reciprocity, rather than money changing hands. Number 3, the currency of jet fuel. Because nearly everything imported has to fly or sail in, the cost of living on Rapa Nui runs about 30 to 40% higher than in Santiago for basic goods. Rent for a small house near Hanga Roa can run $400 to $700 a month, which sounds reasonable until you realize local wages are lower than the mainland average. A teacher here might earn $700 to $900 monthly. A hotel worker in the tourism sector, which employs the vast majority of the island, might make $500 to $800 plus tips during peak season. Gasoline is another story entirely. Fuel arrives by the same ship that brings groceries, so prices at the island's single gas station swing wildly, depending on shipping schedules and global oil prices. Islanders have responded the way remote communities always do. They carpool, they walk more than mainlanders would consider normal, and a huge portion of the population gets around on small motorbikes that sip fuel instead of guzzling it. Electricity comes from a diesel generator plant, since there's no connection to any continental grid, obviously. Power costs here run noticeably higher than in Santiago, and outages during storms or fuel delivery delays aren't unusual. Solar panels have started appearing on rooftops over the last decade, not as an environmental statement, but as basic financial common sense. A handful of guesthouse owners have gone further, installing small battery systems alongside their solar panels so that a delayed fuel shipment doesn't mean turning guests away during a blackout. It's a quiet arms race of self-sufficiency, each household finding its own workaround to a problem the mainland never has to think about. Number 4. The internet arrived shockingly late. For decades, Easter Island's connection to the outside digital world ran through a satellite link that was slow, expensive, and maddeningly unreliable. Video calls dropped constantly. Streaming was basically a fantasy. Then, in 2022, a submarine fiber optic cable finally connected the island to mainland Chile, stretching over 3,000 kilometers under the Pacific Ocean floor, one of the longest underwater cable runs of its kind anywhere in the world. Overnight, internet speeds on Rapa Nui jumped from barely usable to genuinely fast. Kids who'd grown up watching videos buffer for minutes suddenly had access to full high-definition streaming. Small businesses that relied on tourism bookings could finally process transactions in real time, instead of waiting for a satellite window to open. Local officials called it one of the most transformative infrastructure projects in the island's modern history. And talking to residents now, you can feel why. A grandmother running a small guest house told a visiting journalist that before the cable, she'd lose bookings, simply because the payment page wouldn't load in time. Now her business runs like any small hotel anywhere else in the world. The cable also opened the door to something nobody expected: remote work. A small but growing number of young Rapa Nui residents now freelance online, doing graphic design or translation work for clients on the mainland, earning income without ever boarding that 5 times a week flight to Santiago. Number 5. One doctor for thousands of patients. Healthcare on Easter Island exists in a strange middle ground. There's a single hospital, Hanga Roa Hospital, opened in 2021 to replace an older, smaller facility. It handles general medicine, basic surgery, maternity care, and emergency stabilization. But anything serious, a major surgery, cancer treatment, complex cardiac care, requires a flight to Santiago, which means patients sometimes wait days for the next available seat on a plane that's already fully booked with tourists. This isn't a small inconvenience. It's a matter of life and death planning that every islander carries in the back of their mind. Pregnant women in their final weeks are frequently advised to fly to the mainland ahead of their due date, just in case complications arise that the local hospital can't handle. Families budget not just for the cost of the flight, but for weeks of lodging in Santiago, while a relative recovers from something that would be routine anywhere else. And yet, residents describe a tight-knit medical community where everyone genuinely knows everyone. The handful of doctors and nurses stationed here become almost like extended family, recognized by name in the grocery store, invited to birthday parties, trusted the way you'd trust an uncle rather than an anonymous physician. It's a trade-off between scale and intimacy that mainland hospitals simply can't replicate. Telemedicine has started closing some of the gap too. Doctors on the island now regularly consult with specialists in Santiago over video calls, something that would have been impossible before the fiber cable arrived. Number 6. School starts with the language of the ancestors. Education here carries a cultural weight you won't find in most places. Rapa Nui, the indigenous Polynesian language, is taught alongside Spanish in island schools, a deliberate effort to keep a language that UNESCO once classified as endangered from disappearing entirely. Children grow up bilingual almost by default, switching between Spanish for official business and Rapa Nui at home, with grandparents who remember a very different island. For higher education, though, the story shifts dramatically. There's no university on Rapa Nui. Teenagers who want to pursue a degree beyond high school have exactly one option: leave. They fly to Santiago, enroll in Chilean universities, and often don't return except for holidays and summer breaks. This creates a quiet but persistent brain drain that island elders talk about, with a mixture of pride and worry. Proud that their kids succeed on the mainland, worried that the island's population skews older every year as young adults chase opportunities that simply don't exist on a rock this small. A few local leaders have pushed for a satellite campus or partnership program that would let students complete at least part of a degree remotely, using the new internet infrastructure as a foundation. Nothing formal exists yet, but the conversation has picked up momentum. Number 7. And here's the twist most people never expect. Despite everything, disposable income for locals working in tourism can actually outpace many mainland Chilean jobs because Easter Island's economy runs almost entirely on visitors willing to pay premium prices to see the Moai in person. A local guide leading tours to Rano Raraku, the quarry where nearly all 900 Moai statues were carved, can earn more in a single busy tourist season than a comparable job in Santiago would pay in a full year. Small entrepreneurs have built entire livelihoods around this. Families rent out rooms, run small restaurants serving fresh tuna ceviche and empanadas, or lead horseback tours across volcanic craters. A hostel owner in Hanga Roa described her income during peak months, January through March, as covering nearly 70% of her entire annual earnings, meaning the rest of the year becomes almost a working vacation, tending gardens, fishing, spending time with family, while waiting for the next wave of visitors to arrive. This seasonal rhythm shapes the entire island's relationship with money. Spend big during the slow months feels foolish, so locals have developed a culture of careful saving during peak season, paired with a slower, more relaxed pace the rest of the year, a financial pattern that mirrors farming communities more than typical urban economies. Number 8. Water that falls from the sky and nowhere else. Easter Island has no permanent rivers and no natural springs feeding into a reliable freshwater system. Nearly all drinking water comes from rainfall, collected in 3 volcanic crater lakes, Rano Raraku, Rano Kau, and Rano Aroi, or from groundwater wells that tap into porous volcanic rock. This makes water management a constant, quiet concern for every household. During dry stretches, water pressure in Hanga Roa can drop noticeably, and locals have learned habits mainlanders would find unusual. Showers timed to minutes, laundry done in batches to conserve, rainwater collection barrels sitting outside nearly every home as backup. Officials have discussed building a desalination plant for years, but the cost of importing and maintaining that kind of infrastructure on an island this remote keeps pushing the timeline back. Farmers face an even bigger challenge. Without consistent irrigation, growing crops depends heavily on the unpredictable Pacific weather patterns, meaning a bad rainy season can genuinely threaten local food production, pushing prices for anything grown on island even higher than usual. Number 9. The stone giants that pay everyone's bills. It's impossible to talk about how people live here without talking about the Moai, the enormous carved stone figures that made this island famous worldwide. Nearly 900 of them dot the landscape, some standing upright on ceremonial platforms called ahu, others abandoned mid-transport, frozen exactly where ancient carvers left them centuries ago. These statues are, in a very real sense, the island's entire economic engine. Tourism accounts for the overwhelming majority of local income, and virtually every tourist comes specifically to see the Moai. This creates an unusual dynamic where the island's most sacred cultural heritage doubles as its primary paycheck. Rapa Nui National Park, which protects the statues and surrounding archaeological sites, requires an entry fee from foreign visitors, and that revenue funds not just conservation, but a meaningful chunk of local government services. Elders on the island have mixed feelings about this arrangement. Some worry that turning ancestral monuments into photo opportunities cheapens their spiritual significance. Others argue that without tourist dollars, there'd be no funding at all to protect these sites from erosion, vandalism, or simple neglect. Either way, the Moai aren't just history here. They're the reason the lights stay on. Number 10. A hospital, a bank, a bakery. That's basically it. Hanga Roa, the only real town on the entire island, holds essentially all of Rapa Nui's infrastructure. One hospital, one bank branch, which didn't even exist until relatively recently, meaning older residents remember a time when banking meant flying to the mainland just to deposit a check. A handful of small grocery stores, a police station, a post office that handles mail with the kind of patience you'd need for a place this far from everywhere. There's no shopping mall, no chain restaurants, no big box stores of any kind. Every business is locally owned, often family-run for generations. This creates a tight economic ecosystem where reputation means everything. If a restaurant serves bad fish or a shop overcharges tourists, word spreads through a community this size almost instantly, and the business suffers immediately. It's a level of accountability that anonymous city life simply doesn't enforce. Number 11. The airport runway NASA helped build. Here's something that surprises almost everyone. Mataveri International Airport, the island's only airport, has one of the longest runways in the entire southern hemisphere, nearly 3,300 meters. Why would a tiny island with under 8,000 residents need a runway that long? Because in the 1980s, NASA identified it as an emergency abort landing site for the Space Shuttle program. Should a shuttle ever need to divert mid-mission over the Pacific, that runway never ended up being used for a shuttle landing, but it permanently changed the island's relationship with the outside world. It meant larger aircraft could land here, which meant more tourists could visit, which meant the entire modern tourism economy that sustains the island today became possible. A runway built for a space program that never needed it ended up being the single most important piece of infrastructure in local daily life. Number 12. The ocean as backyard, refrigerator, and church. For most residents, the Pacific isn't scenery, it's survival and identity woven together. Families fish not just for income, but for subsistence. And traditional methods, hand lines, small boats, techniques passed down through generations, remain common alongside more modern equipment. Kids learn to swim almost before they learn to walk properly, and free diving for octopus or lobster along the rocky coastline is a rite of passage for many young islanders. There's also a spiritual dimension. Rapa Nui culture holds deep reverence for the sea as the origin point of their Polynesian ancestors, who, according to oral tradition, arrived by canoe from other Pacific islands centuries ago, navigating using only stars and ocean currents, no instruments at all. That heritage shows up today in local surfing culture, considered some of the best and most consistent breaks in the entire South Pacific, drawing a small but dedicated community of surfers who choose to live here specifically for the waves, accepting the isolation and high prices as the cost of admission to genuinely uncrowded, world-class surf. Number 13. The census that keeps shrinking and growing at once. Population dynamics here tell a fascinating, slightly contradictory story. The permanent Rapa Nui population, meaning people with direct indigenous ancestry, has stayed relatively stable, hovering around 4,000 people for years. But total island population has grown because mainland Chileans have moved here in increasing numbers, drawn by tourism jobs and business opportunities, alongside a smaller number of foreign expats who fell in love with the place on vacation and simply never left. This has created quiet tension. Indigenous Rapa Nui leaders have pushed for restrictions on mainland migration to the island, worried that unchecked growth could overwhelm the fragile water, waste, and food systems that already strain to support current numbers. In 2018, Chile actually passed a law limiting how long non-residents can stay on the island without special authorization, an unusual immigration restriction within a single country's own borders, essentially treating Rapa Nui as a special protected zone, separate from ordinary Chilean territory. Number 14. Garbage doesn't just disappear here. Waste management on an island this remote is a genuinely difficult puzzle. There's no landfill space to spare on a volcanic rock this small, and shipping garbage back to the mainland costs money the local government doesn't always have. For years, this meant recyclables, old appliances, and general trash accumulated faster than the island could process them. Recent efforts have improved things. A recycling program now sorts materials for shipment back to Chile aboard the same cargo vessels that bring in groceries, essentially using the boat's return trip productively instead of sending it back empty. Locals have become unusually conscious about consumption as a result, reusing containers, composting food scraps for gardens, and generally treating waste with a seriousness that denser, less resource-constrained places rarely bother with. Number 15. A birthday party is basically a community event. Social life on Rapa Nui runs on a rhythm shaped entirely by the island's small size. Everyone genuinely does know everyone, not in the exaggerated way small towns claim to, but literally, a population under 8,000 means a birthday celebration, wedding, or funeral typically draws a meaningful percentage of the entire island's residents. This creates an intensely communal culture where privacy, in the Western sense, barely exists, but support in times of hardship runs incredibly deep. If a family's roof needs fixing after a storm, neighbors show up with tools before anyone even has to ask. If a fisherman's boat engine breaks down, someone in town almost certainly has spare parts or knows how to fix it. This mutual reliance, born necessarily from isolation, produces a version of community that denser cities lose the moment population crosses a certain threshold. Number 16. The museum guarding stolen history. One of the island's most significant and quietly painful cultural issues involves a Moai statue currently sitting in the British Museum in London. Taken in 1868 by a British naval vessel, for decades, island representatives have formally requested its return, arguing that a piece of their direct ancestral heritage belongs on the island where it was carved, not in a glass case thousands of kilometers away. This fight over repatriation reflects something bigger about daily life here, a persistent tension between the island as a living, breathing indigenous community and the island as a tourist attraction shaped by outside forces. First, European explorers, later, Chilean administration, now, global tourism. Locals navigate this tension every single day, proud custodians of one of humanity's most mysterious archaeological legacies, while simultaneously fighting to maintain control over how that legacy gets told, displayed, and monetized. Number 17. Church bells and ancient chants, side by side. Roman Catholicism arrived here in the 19th century through missionaries and remains the dominant religion today, but it exists in a genuinely unique blend with older Rapa Nui spiritual traditions. Sunday Mass at Hanga Roa's church often incorporates Rapa Nui language, traditional singing styles, and imagery drawn from ancestral iconography alongside standard Catholic liturgy, creating a religious experience you won't find replicated anywhere else on Earth. Traditional festivals still hold enormous cultural weight too, especially Tapati Rapa Nui, a 2-week celebration each February featuring competitions in traditional dance, body painting, canoe racing, and a grueling event where competitors slide down a volcanic slope on banana tree trunks at frightening speed. Families spend months preparing costumes and training for these competitions, and the entire island essentially pauses normal life to participate, turning cultural preservation into something closer to a beloved sport than a museum exhibit. Number 18. Why almost nobody actually leaves for good. Given everything, the high prices, the medical limitations, the total absence of a university, you might expect young islanders to abandon Rapa Nui in droves once they experience mainland Chile. Some do, permanently, but a striking number return, often after years away, describing an inexplicable pullback toward the island that mainland life never quite satisfies. Interviews with returnees consistently mention the same things: the silence at night, uninterrupted by traffic, the ocean visible from nearly every point on the island, the sense that everyone around you actually knows your name and your family's history going back generations. One islander who spent 6 years studying and working in Santiago described moving back as choosing a smaller paycheck but a bigger life, trading urban convenience for something money genuinely can't buy anywhere else on the planet. Number 19. The housing market nobody can quite explain. Buying land on Rapa Nui works nothing like anywhere else in Chile, largely because most land here isn't privately owned in the conventional sense. Under Chilean law, land ownership on the island is restricted almost entirely to people of Rapa Nui descent, a protection put in place to prevent outside investors from buying up the island the way they've done to other Pacific paradises. Foreigners who want to live here long-term typically end up leasing property from local families rather than purchasing it outright, and those lease arrangements can stretch across generations, passed down like an inheritance in their own right. This creates a strange but functional housing market where cash alone can't simply buy your way in. A hotel developer with millions of dollars can't just show up and build a resort the way they might in Cancun or Bali. Instead, any serious tourism development requires partnership with a local Rapa Nui family who holds the underlying land rights, meaning profits from tourism growth stay distributed among island families rather than flowing entirely to outside corporations. That said, housing within Hanga Roa itself has still gotten noticeably tighter as the population has crept upward. Young couples starting families sometimes end up living with parents or extended relatives for years longer than they'd like, simply because building a new home means importing lumber, concrete, and skilled labor at costs that make new construction a genuine luxury rather than a routine life milestone. Number 20. The schoolyard economy of imported snacks. Kids on Rapa Nui develop a sharp sense of value at a young age, largely because imported treats, chips, chocolate, soda carry a kind of scarcity premium that mainland children never experience. A candy bar that costs under $1 in Santiago might run $2 or $3 here, and because shipments arrive irregularly, certain snacks simply vanish from shelves for weeks at a time before reappearing without warning. This has turned trading and bartering into something of a playground tradition. A kid who scored the last bag of a particular chip flavor before a shipment ran dry becomes, briefly, the most popular person at recess. Parents describe teaching their children early lessons about patience and delayed gratification simply because the alternative, constant disappointment over unavailable snacks, would make for a miserable childhood on an island where supply chains simply don't run on anyone's convenient schedule. Number 21. The volunteer fire brigade that everyone eventually joins. With no large-scale professional emergency services the way a mainland city would have, Rapa Nui relies heavily on volunteer response networks for fires, search and rescue along the coastline, and general community emergencies. It's not unusual for a shop owner, a school teacher, and a hotel manager to all belong to the same volunteer unit, training together on weekends and responding together when something goes wrong, regardless of their day job. This arrangement works because of the island's small scale, but it also reflects something deeper about how life here functions generally. Formal institutions that mainland residents take for granted, dedicated fire departments, large hospital staffs, extensive police forces, simply don't scale down neatly to a population this size. Instead, islanders have built an entire parallel system of mutual obligation, where everyone understands that someday they might need their neighbor's help, and so everyone shows up when their neighbor needs theirs. Even something as small as a car breaking down on the coastal road tends to get resolved within the hour, simply because word travels fast and somebody nearby almost always has the right tool or the right connection. That trade-off, smaller economy, smaller conveniences, but an irreplaceable sense of belonging, sits at the heart of what makes life on Easter Island so different from almost anywhere else you could choose to live. It's expensive, it's remote to a degree that's almost hard to comprehend, and it demands a level of self-sufficiency most of us never have to develop. But for the people who choose to stay, or choose to come back, it offers something increasingly rare in the modern world. A life measured not in convenience, but in connection. If this video gave you a new appreciation for just how differently people can build a life on this planet, hit like and subscribe so more of these deep dives land in your feed. And tell me in the comments, could you actually live somewhere this isolated, or would the distance from everything eventually get to you? I'll be reading through the answers.